Hi everyone, this is Jesus Rivas, the Research and Planning Analyst for San Diego Continuing Education. And today I want to talk to you about what is annual integrated planning. What is annual integrated planning? Well, annual integrated planning is a process that informs multiple activities across the institution. Annual integrated planning involves three different things: program review, strategic planning, and request for resources. Perhaps so far you are thinking that this is too ambiguous, this is too high level, and doesn't really give you the details that you need. So let me try to explain this with an example. For annual integrated planning, the first step that you need to think about is program review. Program review is an exercise in which we reflect about the past. We look back to the different events that transpired during the last year. Or sometimes we even go further than that when we're looking at the data. For example, instructional programs, they need to go back 5 years in the data and they start looking at different trends, different changes, different things that have happened in their programs, and then build some narrative about that. So that is what program review is about. Just to give you an example, program review would be the place where faculty, or it would be the place where program chairs would include information about how hard it was for some students to learn how to use Canvas. So that's something that you would include in your program review. You would go back and you would start looking at the events that happened last year, and then you would say, well, one of the highlights, one of the major problems that we had is that students didn't know how to use Canvas. So again, you reflected and then you found a problem. And obviously, since you found a problem, it is pretty much likely that you'll be thinking in a solution, right? Well, that takes us to the next logic step, which is planning. We already analyzed the past, now we're thinking about the future. So that's when strategic planning kicks in. The strategic planning is about thinking how are we gonna keep improving, right? So it's just laying out the different plans that you have for your unit, for your department, for your program. And going back to my example, in this case, as I said, I identified that my students had a hard time using Canvas. Well, now I'm going to include in my plan that I'm going to develop some Canvas remedial content, some sort of training that is going to tell students how to use Canvas. It's going to help them so that they don't struggle with this piece of the process. So as you can see, now I'm thinking about the future. Now I'm thinking about how I'm going to fix a particular problem that I found. Now, sometimes when you find a problem and then you identify a potential solution, you might have all the different resources that you need to make that happen. And that's perfectly fine. Perhaps you identify some sort of training online that is free and the students can use that, or maybe you can use that. And you don't need any kind of money to, you don't need to pay any kind of license for that training, or you don't need to do anything out of the normal to share that particular training with your students. But let's say for one moment that that is not true. Let's say that you don't have any material at all to show students how to use Canvas. So you need to develop that from scratch. So that's when you are gonna have to request for resources to make that happen. And that's the third step of the annual integrated planning process, which is requesting for resources. Some of the activities that you'll be including in your in your activity, in your strategic planning, you'll need resources to make that to make them happen. So in this case, I'm going to include that I need non-classroom assignment to develop the materials. I'll put a request for resources stating that. Now, if I go back, let's go back for a minute and think about this. So the annual integrated process is a process in which we look back, we identify different highlights, different problems, different opportunities, different things that happened throughout the year or throughout the last couple of years. So that's program review. And then once we do that, we future in that strategic planning. So we develop objectives, we develop plans, we develop action steps, things that we want to do in the future. And then with that, finally, we're able to identify what are the resources that we need to get to that place in the future where you want to be. What are the resources that you need? So that's when you do a request for resources. And that's pretty much all the process. So in conclusion, the annual integrated planning is a process that informs different things. Now, just using the example that I just gave to you, the one about students not knowing how to use Canvas, well, that could inform different things. For example, when you do program planning and improvement, well, now you know that you need to develop some sort of remedial training for students, because you cannot assume, you cannot assume that students will know how to use Canvas. So you need to be ready for that. Institutional planning, well, now the institution, maybe at the institution-wide level, the, the, that problem is also happening everywhere. So the institution will have to make a call whether if they need to purchase a different software, perhaps some software that is not as complicated, or maybe they just need to follow a different approach. For accreditation, obviously, if you're thinking about different ways to make the student experience more fun or better or easier, if you're just trying to find ways to help students to be more successful, obviously you want to include that in your accreditation reports. So that's another thing that is being informed by all this process. And then finally, the resource allocation. As I said, if the institution has a given budget, well, the institution will be informed by all the different requests for resources that people have put together to really know how to disperse the funding or how to distribute the money. So it's a very useful way to. The annual integrated planning process is a very useful way to inform this process. So as I said, this process comprises 3 activities: program review, looking back, strategic planning, thinking about the future, and request for resources, asking for the things that you need to get to that place where you want to be in the future. I do want to point out that this was meant to just give you a short, quick overview of the annual integrated planning process. If you want to learn a little more about any of these activities, program review, strategic plan, and request for resources, you can watch the videos that we have developed, which are going to provide you with more detailed information. Thank you.